Right, well, my name's Barney, and yeah, we're in Bluebow Hill, which is just outside of Maidstone in Kent. I set this place up 17 years ago now. We started off just as a studio just for me. It was never meant to be a commercial venture, just for mixing. At the time I was working at Eden Studios in London, and it coincided that was closing at the time I was sort of building this. So we got the desk and the Pro Tools rig and the speakers and pretty much everything from that studio, which was quite nice because they're my favourite studios, and so it made it quite easy for me to just sort of, just stick it in here. It's actually a little bit more difficult than just being here and sticking here, but yeah, it was. But yeah, and then I just been mixing here then I think for like 5 years. And then I built the live room, and then over the last sort of 10 or so years we've started to renovate the house, and then we sort of went residential and put it out. And recently, over the last 4 years, we've just finished the house and finished everything. So now it's getting a lot more popular as a residential studio. It's always just been for me, and I think when you make a studio that is just for you, you don't design it like a commercial space, with every piece of outboard for everyone, or you just sort of design it how you want, and then but people quite like that because it's homely, and you get the whole house, and it's very sort of nice and relaxed being here, so it doesn't feel like walking into a commercial studio. So it feels like walking into someone's home.
It really does,
with a studio in it, and that's because that's what it is.
So I'm Tom or Clay, most commonly referred to as Clay anyway. I'm the engineer here at Bluebow Hill Studios, and I'm effectively who you get when you book this place and stay here and, do your recording sessions. Yeah, so I did go to uni, and before that I did a little bit of work for a publishing company doing session guitaring. I was really young at the time. A mate of mine signed me up for it, and so I went into university to learn to arrange and compose. It was a course that sort of spanned about a little bit of production. It was mainly on the arrangement and composition side of things, but then I got much more into my production whilst I was working on my uni projects. There was a studio that had an SSL desk in the university. I was quite lucky, and so I had quite hands-on experience working with quite a few pieces of, I guess, iconic gear, and forming my own opinions on that. Because I wasn't on a production course, I wasn't learning other people's opinions of them as well. I was just, stick a random mic in front of a source, see how it sounds, and I was more focused on the arrangement and sort of the frequency side of that. I came here and learned, how a real studio sort of functions in a modern day environment, and again it just became a process of making my own opinions on mics, making my own opinions on outboard gear, as well as, listening to the people around me, because, you got two of these and one of these, which is what my dad says, so.
I sort of grew up around here, and then when I was 20, moved up to London. I got a few jobs, just like T-boys in studios, but then I got a job at Orinoco as like a sort of runner, basically, and I was there for about 7 years, and that took me up to being sort of in-house engineer. Then when they sold it to Moloko, I then was doing a lot of work with Jim Abbis, and we worked together for probably another sort of 7 odd years, just all around the world, recording and mixing together, him producing, me engineering and mixing. It was after the Arctic Monkeys record, the first one that we did, and then it was at that time that I was setting up this place. The last 15 years I've pretty much just been here mixing away. It's quite a sort of typical route. Like, there was no courses or anything. It was just, I was started off, making tea, washing cars. Coin cable. I loved it all. I loved every second of it, and I never slept for years, and it was brilliant. And I was very lucky. Orinoco was a great little independent studio, and they had wonderful bands, like Oasis and the Chemical Brothers, and all that sort of back end sort of Britpop stuff. It was really lucky for me, because that kind of like accelerated your career, and it meant that people would book the studio and they would book an in-house engineer. So for instance, that's how I met Jim, and we did one session together, and then you go off and you work with a whole load of different producers for years and years, and those sort of opportunities aren't really around anymore, which is a shame. And I think I'm probably the last sort of generation of an engineer that would grow up in that environment, working with a whole host of different people in wonderful studios, all around the place. It's a shame. You get really good training that way, and you learn to see how people make good records and the mistakes they make, which is just as important as making good decisions and all of that. So I was really, really lucky. It's always been the same in as much as that you need to find your own work. You need to be constantly working. You don't expect to get paid. You need to have and you need to get like a bit of a back catalogue behind you, and this is the kind of job that you never master. You're never any good because there's always someone better than you, and you're constantly self-doubting, and so just constantly working, finding work and making all the mistakes and making good records and bad records and learning. It's like it goes on forever. You never get to the point where you know what you're doing. So that's what I would suggest. Just find your own work, and if you do stuff happens. If you sit around doing nothing happens. So you just got to do it. I forget most things. To be honest, I've got a terrible memory. I tend to remember the ones that are most fun.
Right.
I remember recording Kasabian was good fun. We did the first 2 records. And that was fun because they're a fun bunch of guys, and it was a great time, and we were in Rockfield, I think, for months and months, and sessions like that, and also travelling to other places. I did quite a lot of sessions in New York and stuff like that. So you remember them for those reasons, and because you're with people, so it's exciting and it's fun and stuff. Mixing, you can't really remember anything. I can't remember what I did last week.
That was my next question.
Yeah. So it's obviously it's really wonderful when you do a record and it comes out and people like it and it it's there. It's not the drive for doing it, but it really is nice, and therefore you kind of remember it a bit more. Like I suppose I do remember mixing that first Arctic Monkeys record, and that was only because we mixed it on an old TGI. EMI console.
Really nice.
So we had like it's a 16 channel desk.
Really cool.
So that was really good because it was just like drums, bass, overheads, bass, 2 guitars, 1 vocal and backing vocals, and that was it. And that was memorable because I started mixing it on an SSL when I had the idea of doing it on this old desk because I had one there, and it took me like the whole record to work out how to use the desk. Like right at the end, probably like the 8th tune, I cracked it. And then just went back and just redid it all. And really the key is just to turn everything up, like really loud, so it just limits the master bus and everything sounds brilliant. Sometimes with mixing, with everything on an SSL or with all the outboard or plugins, you've got a lot of these tools that you can kind of almost like rely on them like a crutch, like you go to them because you know that it works. And when you take all that away, you're kind of a little bit more back to basics. And you've just got up, down, left and right, and that's quite nice in a way. It takes you a little while to get used to that again, and so it was quite good fun to mix in a different way, and actually just you can use that console to make a sound. You can't do it's only top and bottom. You can't do anything like that, but it's just sort of how you work the gain structure and you push it all to make it sound punchy because you've got no other tools available to you.
It started with my first mic that I ever spent my own money on and bought was a Aston Origin, and it was because in that first uni SSL studio we had an Origin, a Spirit and 2 other Aston Mics, and they were just the mics that I defaulted to. They were the mics that I remembered how to use, knew sort of what they sounded like, what they sounded good in front of, acoustic guitars, and me doing my session stuff. If I was using an acoustic guitar, I knew it sounded good in front of that, so it made sense. I got the Origin, and I've had that for the past, I want to say 5 or 7 years, and not a scratch on it. It's completely reliable, and I don't expect it to be going anywhere. It's sort of my one mic for anything. And I brought it in on a session that we had here recently, which was a jazz session, and I like to think of it as minimal mics on the drum kit, especially because we had all the other musicians around. It just made sense to have as few mics as possible and to let the sort of musicians breathe. And so we had one mic on the kick, one mic on the snare, and then two overheads just pointing down, and then in front of them capturing the sound of the whole drum kit as well as a little bit of spill from everything around it was Origin and my Origin. And in the end we basically turned down almost to like nothing. I think the fader was on, you know, minus 25, minus 30, and just had that Origin take giving the sound of the drum kit.
From what I've seen today, I think they're brilliant. I mean, I know it's not important, but I think stylistically they're really good, and I think that's kind of really nice. It looks like the build quality is brilliant, you know, as well as the design. The price point sounds like really realistic. I kind of like everything about it. What I also want is for people who I mix for when I'm mixing for, which a lot of people now who are sort of doing it themselves and don't have the budget to, you know, to go into sort of studios like this, is to record with decent microphones, because it makes a better sounding record and it makes my job a million times easier. And I want everyone to have proper microphones. Because it would just mean I can get home earlier.
I was a bit of a gear nerd at one point in my uni years, and a roommate of mine really was just looking for a mic that he could do all his vocal sessions on. You know, I'd recently bought my Origin, I was obsessed with it, and I just showed it to him and he said, oh, it'd be really interesting in getting one of those, but it's either that or an SM7B. But he got the Stealth and he then just used it on all his session work, and I, you know, borrowed it for, you know, every odd session. And so we got quite a lot of sort of home bedroom use out of it, and it was exactly what we needed. When I used the 7B in the studio, I never particularly liked it, and I always had to have the cloud lifter box. It was just such a faff that I was like, there's no point, just chuck one mic, and, you know, the best mic is the one in your hand, so just put that in front of it. And the Stealth was really helpful for that. So I now use both a Stealth and a Origin back home when I'm doing session stuff. Yeah, fairly excited about the Apex. I mean, I know it always looked to me very much like a bit of a spaceship mic. It looks very different to anything else, as with most of the Aston range, but it's got that real sort of sci-fi look to it. And I'm always looking for something to beat the hell out of my SM57. So yeah, looking forward to another Aston mic in my collection.